The crystal chandeliers of the Corleone room cast warm amber light across tables draped in cream linen, each setting worth more than most people earned in a week.
You're welcome, sir.
Isabel Santoro moved through the dining room with practiced invisibility, her black uniform pressed to perfection, her dark hair pulled back in a bun so tight it made her scalp ache after the first hour. She carried a tray of Barolo, each bottle priced at $400, and poured with the kind of precision that came from 2 years of muscle memory and the constant awareness that a single mistake could cost her this job. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a pre-war building on Madison Avenue, its mahogany panels and marble floors designed to make wealthy patrons feel they'd stepped into old-world Europe without leaving Manhattan. Isabel had learned early that the best servers were the ones guests never really noticed, shadows who appeared when needed and vanished the moment their task was complete. She perfected the art of being present without existing, of hearing conversations without listening, of watching everything while appearing to see nothing. Tonight felt different. The private dining room in the back had been reserved for a party of 12, and Luther Ashford, the restaurant manager, had been on edge all afternoon. Luther was 61, silver-haired and perpetually tense, the kind of man who treated wealthy patrons like visiting royalty and his staff like disposable tools. He'd pulled Isabel aside before service started, his fingers digging into her arm hard enough to leave marks. "Watch your step tonight. Very important client. No mistakes." She hadn't asked who. It didn't matter. Every client was important to Luther. Every evening a performance where the slightest misstep could trigger his wrath. Isabel had witnessed 3 servers fired in her 2 years here, escorted out mid-shift for infractions as minor as forgetting to refill a water glass fast enough. The private room door opened at 7:30 sharp, and the guests began to arrive. Isabel caught glimpses through the doorway as Silas Brennan, the senior server, ushered them inside. Men in suits that cost more than her monthly rent, women in dresses that probably required their own insurance policies. She focused on her section of the main dining room, refilling wine glasses and clearing plates, until Luther appeared at her elbow. "You're reassigned. Private room. Silas needs help with the party size." Isabel's stomach tightened. Private rooms meant closer proximity to guests, more opportunities for the kind of interaction that could go wrong. But Luther was already walking away, and refusing wasn't an option. She smoothed her apron, picked up a tray of sparkling water, and pushed through the door. The man at the head of the table commanded attention without effort. Donovan Vitale was 72, though he carried his age with the kind of dignity that came from wealth accumulated over decades. His silver hair was swept back from a face carved by time and Mediterranean sun, his dark eyes sharp despite the lines around them. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Isabel's entire year of rent, and when he gestured while speaking, everyone at the table leaned forward. He was speaking Italian. Not the modern, standardized version taught in universities, but something older, more fluid. Isabel recognized it immediately because her grandmother had spoken the same way, though Maria Russo had been dead for 10 years, and the language had died with her. Almost. The fragments remained in Isabel's memory like shards of colored glass, beautiful and sharp, and impossible to fully reassemble. She approached the table from Donovan's left side, setting down water glasses with quiet efficiency. The conversation continued around her, something about real estate developments and zoning permits. One of the other men asked a question in English, and Donovan switched languages without missing a beat. "The Brooklyn project is moving forward despite the delays. We've secured preliminary approval for the mixed-use development, 47 floors, residential and commercial. Groundbreaking in 6 months." Isabel's hand hesitated for just a fraction of a second as she placed the last glass. 6 months. The timeline was aggressive, almost impossibly so for a project that size in Brooklyn. She'd read enough about real estate development during her time at Columbia to know that permits alone could take a year, maybe more. Something about the confidence in Donovan's voice felt performative, a show for the other investors, rather than a realistic assessment. She turned to leave, but Donovan was still talking, and without thinking, without planning it, the words slipped out in the same Sicilian dialect he'd been using earlier, the one her grandmother had taught her through bedtime stories and songs when Isabel was small enough to sit in her lap. "Uvino, signori." "Wine, sir?" The effect was instantaneous. Donovan's hand, reaching for his water glass, froze midair. His face went pale, then flushed, color rising in his cheeks like he'd been struck. The conversations around the table faltered and died as everyone turned to look at him, then at Isabel. She felt 12 pairs of eyes lock onto her, and the weight of their attention made her skin prickle. Donovan stared at her with an expression she couldn't parse. Shock, certainly, but underneath it something else. Recognition? Grief? His lips moved without sound, and for a moment Isabel thought he might be having some kind of medical episode. Then he spoke, and his voice came out rough and fractured. Uni imparasti a parlare così? Where did you learn to speak like that? He'd switched entirely to the dialect now, abandoning Italian, abandoning English, speaking in the language of villages and hillsides that barely existed anymore. Isabel's heart hammered against her ribs. She shouldn't have said anything. She should have stayed invisible, should have kept the dialect locked away where it belonged, in the past with her grandmother and all the secrets Maria Russo had carried to her grave. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to—" "No." Donovan held up a hand, and the authority in the gesture silenced her. He continued in dialect, his words urgent and precise. "That accent, that way of speaking, it's not from Palermo, not from Catania. That's mountain speech. Western hills. Only people from one village speak exactly like that." One of the other men at the table, a younger guy in a navy suit, leaned toward Donovan. "Is everything all right? Should we—" Donovan ignored him. His entire focus remained on Isabel, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to step backward, to run, to disappear through the kitchen door and never come back. But her legs wouldn't move. She stood frozen under his gaze while he searched her features for something she didn't understand. "Utonomo? Your name?" The dialect again. Isabel's mouth felt dry. She could lie, could give a fake name, but what was the point? Luther knew who she was. The restaurant had her tax documents, her social security number, her mother's address as her emergency contact. Isabel Santoro. Santoro. Donovan repeated it slowly, tasting the syllables. His brow furrowed. "E to Matri? What was your mother's name before marriage?" This was going too far. The other guests were shifting uncomfortably, glancing at each other with expressions that ranged from confusion to concern. Silas Brennan hovered near the door, his weathered face tight with worry. Luther would be furious if this disrupted the entire evening. Isabel could already feel the reprimand coming, could already see the way he'd pull her aside after service and explain in his coldest voice that she was no longer needed at the Corleone room. "I should get back to my duties, sir. Excuse me." She turned toward the door, but Donovan stood so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. The sound cut through the room like a knife. "Aspetta! Wait!" His voice cracked on the word. "Please." The please stopped her, not because Donovan said it with authority, but because he said it with desperation. She looked back and found him standing with one hand braced against the table like he needed the support to remain upright. His eyes were wet. That dialect, that exact way of speaking. He was back to English now, but his accent had thickened, roughened with emotion. "I haven't heard it in over 40 years. Not since I left Sicily. Not since I left Corleone." Something cold slithered down Isabel's spine. Corleone, her grandmother's village. The place Maria Russo never spoke about, never explained, never let her daughter or granddaughter ask about. The place Rosa Santoro had forbidden Isabel from researching, from studying, from even acknowledging existed. My grandmother was from Sicily, sir. She taught me some phrases when I was young. That's all. Donovan took a step closer. The other guests had gone completely silent now, watching this exchange like spectators at a tennis match. He reached out as if to touch Isabel's arm, then stopped himself, his hand hovering in the air between them. Maria. He said the name in dialect, the way her grandmother used to say it, with the stress on the second syllable, and the final vowel drawn out like a note held too long. Maria Russo. The door to the private room opened, and Luther Ashford stepped inside, his expression fixed in the professional smile he used when addressing wealthy clients. Is everything satisfactory, Mr. Vitale? I understand there's been some... Get out. Donovan didn't look at Luther. His eyes remained locked on Isabel. Mr. Vitale, if there's been any... I said get out. All of you. The dinner is over. My apologies, but something has come up. Something important. The guests exchanged glances, then began to stand. The man in the navy suit touched Donovan's shoulder. Don, we can reschedule. Take whatever time you need. They filed out slowly, murmuring among themselves, casting curious looks at Isabel as they passed. Luther's professional smile had turned rigid, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. When the last guest had gone, he turned to Isabel. Miss Santoro? Return to the main dining room immediately. Mr. Vitale, again, my sincere apologies for any... Leave us. Donovan's voice carried the kind of authority that came from decades of giving orders and expecting them to be followed. Luther's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then he nodded once and left, pulling the door shut behind him. Isabel stood alone in the private dining room with a man she'd never met. A man who looked at her like she was a ghost he'd been searching for his entire life. The silence stretched between them, heavy and expectant. Finally, Donovan moved to the nearest chair and sat down heavily, as if his legs could no longer support him. How old was your grandmother when she came to America? I don't know. 20-something, I think. She never talked about it. And your mother? His voice was careful now, controlled. How old is your mother? 52? Donovan closed his eyes. The math was simple, brutal. If Maria Russo had come to America at 20-something, pregnant or with a very young child, and that child was now 52. He opened his eyes again and looked at Isabel with an expression that combined hope and terror in equal measure. Your mother's father. What do you know about him? Nothing. Grandma Maria never said. Mom doesn't know. Or if she does, she never told me. Maria came to America alone? Yes. She worked in factories, then as a seamstress. She saved enough to buy a small house in Queens. She raised my mother by herself. Donovan's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the table, and Isabel could see the effort it took for him to keep his voice steady. I knew Maria Russo in Sicily, in Corleone. We were... His voice broke. We were in love. The words hung in the air between them. Isabel's mind raced, trying to process what he was implying, what he was suggesting. But it was too big, too impossible. Her grandmother had been a seamstress in Queens, a quiet woman who made pasta on Sundays and sang old songs while she worked. She wasn't connected to wealthy men in expensive suits, to people who ate $400 bottles of wine and talked about 47-floor developments. I need to go. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I need to get back to work. Please. Donovan pulled something from his jacket pocket, a business card. He produced a pen and wrote on the back, his hand still trembling. This is my private number, not my office, just mine. Call me. Tomorrow, next week, whenever you're ready. But please, I need to know. I need to understand how you came to speak that dialect, how you came to know those words. Because only 2 families in Corleone spoke exactly that way. Mine and Maria's. Isabel took the card because refusing felt too complicated, too likely to extend this conversation. The cardstock was heavy, expensive, embossed with gold lettering, Vitale Holdings. She turned it over and saw a phone number written in surprisingly elegant script. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Titale. My grandmother was a good woman, but I can't help you with whatever you're looking for. She left before he could respond, pushing through the door into the main dining room where the evening service continued around her like nothing had happened. But everything had happened. The world had tilted on its axis, and Isabel felt like she was walking through water, every movement too slow, too heavy. Silas Brennan intercepted her near the kitchen. You all right? That was intense. I'm fine. Luther's going to have words with you after shift. Rich guy like that, you can't just... I know. I'll handle it. She made it through the rest of the evening on autopilot, pouring wine and clearing plates and smiling at guests who didn't see her anyway. When the last table had been cleared and the closing duties completed, Luther called her into his office. The room was small and windowless, smelling of old coffee and the vanilla air freshener he kept plugged into the wall. Miss Santoro. He sat behind his desk, fingers steepled. That display tonight was unacceptable. I don't know what kind of relationship you think you have with Mr. Vitale, but this is a professional establishment. We do not engage in personal conversations with guests. We do not disrupt private dinners. We do not make wealthy clients uncomfortable. I apologize. It won't happen again. You're correct. It won't. Consider this your notice. 2 weeks, effective immediately. I'll provide a reference if you need one, but I think it's best if you seek employment elsewhere. The words landed like punches, but Isabel kept her face neutral. She'd known this was coming from the moment Donovan stood up, from the moment the evening derailed. 2 weeks was actually more generous than she'd expected. I understand. Thank you for the notice. She collected her things from the staff room and walked out into the November cold. The city glittered around her. Manhattan at night, transformed into something beautiful and untouchable. She pulled her jacket tighter and started the long subway ride to Jackson Heights, where she shared a 2-bedroom apartment with her mother in a building that had been old when Isabel was born. Rosa Santoro was awake when Isabel let herself in, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea. She was 52 but looked older, her dark hair shot through with gray, her hands trembling slightly from the Parkinson's that had been diagnosed 3 years ago. The disease was progressing faster than the doctors had predicted, each month bringing new symptoms, new limitations, new medications that cost more than Isabel earned. You're home late? Rosa's voice carried the slight slur that came when she was tired, when the medications wore off and the disease took over. Long shift. Isabel dropped her bag by the door and moved to the kitchen. She filled a glass with water and drank it standing at the sink, buying herself time to decide how much to say. Something happened tonight at work. What kind of something? There was a guest, an older man. He's from Sicily, from Corleone. Rosa's teacup rattled against the saucer. She set it down carefully, both hands wrapped around the ceramic like she needed the warmth. Why are you telling me this? Because he knew Grandma Maria. He knew her name, knew where she was from. He said they were in love. The color drained from Rosa's face. She stood up too fast and had to grip the table edge for balance. Isabel moved to help her, but Rosa waved her off with a sharp gesture. No, we're not doing this. We're not talking about this. Mom, he knew her dialect. He spoke it exactly the way Grandma did. He said only 2 families in Corleone spoke that way. His and hers. I don't care what he said. Rosa's voice had gone hard, the tone she used when a discussion was over. Your grandmother left Sicily for good reasons. She left that life behind. She didn't want us connected to any of it. But why? What happened there? What was she running from? She wasn't running. She was surviving. There's a difference. Rosa moved toward the hallway, her gait unsteady. The conversation was over. But Isabel couldn't let it end there. Couldn't let the questions pile up with all the other mysteries her grandmother had taken to the grave. His name is Donovan Vitale. Does that mean anything to you? Rosa stopped in the doorway. For a long moment, she didn't turn around, didn't speak. When she finally looked back, her eyes were wet. Don't look for answers you're not ready to find, Isabel. Some doors, once you open them, you can't close again. She disappeared into her bedroom, and Isabel heard the lock click. She stood alone in the kitchen, Donovan's business card await in her pocket, and pulled out her phone. 3 searches gave her the basics. Donovan Vitale, 72, chairman of Vitale Holdings, estimated net worth $800 million. Real estate development across Manhattan, Brooklyn, and parts of New Jersey. Widowed 12 years ago. 1 son, Sterling Vitale, 40 years old, CEO of the family company. The photo showed a man who looked younger in professional settings, surrounded by blueprints and architectural models. But in the shots from tonight, from charity galas and business dinners, Isabel could see the same haunted expression she'd witnessed in the private dining room, like he was searching for something he'd lost long ago and never stopped looking for. She went to her room and pulled a cardboard box from the top shelf of her closet, her grandmother's things, saved after Maria died. Most of it was ordinary, costume jewelry, a few scarves, recipe cards written in Italian. But at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was a bundle of letters. Isabel had looked at them once, years ago, before her mother caught her and took the box away. Now she unwrapped them carefully and spread them on her bed. The handwriting was old-fashioned, elegant, the ink faded but still legible. All of them were in dialect, the same Sicilian speech patterns her grandmother had used. Isabel's command of the language was fragmentary at best, but she could make out names, dates, phrases that repeated. And one name appeared over and over, sometimes as a signature, sometimes in the body of the text. Vittorio Vitale. She spent the next 3 hours with her phone's translation app and a growing sense of unreality. The letters told a story of young love, secret meetings, promises made under olive trees and by the sea. They spoke of families who disapproved, of pressure and threats, of a choice that Vittorio had to make. And then, in the final letter, dated 1973, an apology, a plea for forgiveness, a confession that he'd chosen duty over love and would regret it for the rest of his life. Below the signature, a different name was written in parentheses. Donovan Vitale. His American name, adopted when he came to New York to start over. Isabel's hands shook as she reached the last letter in the bundle. This one wasn't from Vittorio. It was Maria's handwriting, but the date was recent. 10 years ago, just weeks before she died. It was addressed to Rosa, never sent, written in English. My daughter, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I know you have questions about your father, about why I never told you his name. The truth is complicated, and for most of your life, I thought it was better buried. But now, at the end, I find I can't take it to my grave without giving you the choice. Your father's name is Vittorio Vitale. In America, he calls himself Donovan. We were young and foolish and in love, and when his family demanded he marry someone else, someone suitable, he obeyed. I don't blame him. The world we lived in didn't give us many choices. When I discovered I was pregnant with you, I decided to leave. Not because I was angry, but because I knew his family would never accept you, never let you live in peace. I came to America alone. I built a life. I raised you. And I have no regrets, Rosa, because you were worth everything I left behind. If you ever find Vittorio, if he ever finds you, please know this. He's not a villain. He was young and scared and trapped by obligations bigger than both of us. I forgave him long ago. Whether you choose to seek him out or let the past stay buried, that's your decision to make. But don't let fear keep you from knowing your history. Don't let my silence become your prison. I love you more than words can hold. Mama. Isabel read the letter 3 times, each pass making the words feel more impossible. Her mother had seen this, had to have seen it. The letter was creased, like it had been folded and unfolded many times, read and reread. Rosa knew. She'd known for 10 years that her father was alive, wealthy, living in the same city, and she'd chosen silence. The business card sat on the nightstand. Isabel picked it up, studied the phone number on the back. Tomorrow she'd call. Not because she wanted to, but because her grandmother's final words had been about choice, about not letting fear dictate the future. Maria Russo had given her daughter permission to seek the truth. And now, whether Rosa liked it or not, Isabel was going to do the same. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy. Somewhere across that vast grid of light and steel, Donovan Vitale probably wasn't sleeping either, lying awake with the ghost of a woman he'd loved 50 years ago, and the impossible possibility that she'd left him something more precious than memory. Isabel folded the letters carefully and returned them to the box. Her shift at the Corleone room was over. Her life as an invisible server was ending. But something else was beginning, something that terrified and compelled her in equal measure. She thought about her grandmother's voice, singing old songs in a language almost no one spoke anymore. She thought about the way Donovan's eyes had filled with tears at the sound of that dialect. She thought about Rosa's warning. Some doors, once opened, couldn't be closed. But some doors were meant to be opened. Some secrets were meant to see light. She lay down without changing clothes, the business card clutched in her hand, and waited for morning. Isabel waited until Rosa left for her morning physical therapy appointment before making the call. The apartment felt larger in her mother's absence, the silence amplifying every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren from the street below. She sat at the kitchen table with Donovan's business card positioned in front of her like evidence at a trial. The numbers both invitation and accusation. Her finger hovered over the screen 3 times before she finally pressed dial. The phone rang twice. Vitale residence? The voice was professional, female, probably an assistant or housekeeper. I'm calling for Donovan Vitale. My name is Isabel Santoro. He asked me to... One moment, please. The hold lasted less than 15 seconds. Then a different voice came through, rougher and urgent. Isabel, thank God. I wasn't sure you'd call. Something about hearing Donovan's voice outside the restaurant made him more real, more human, less the wealthy patron and more the desperate old man she'd seen break down over a fragment of dialect. I found letters, from you to my grandmother. You signed them Vittorio. A sharp intake of breath crackled through the speaker. She kept them? All these years, she kept them? There's also a letter from her. To my mother. She knew about you. She wanted my mom to have the choice of finding you. The silence stretched so long, Isabel thought the connection had dropped. Then Donovan spoke, each word careful and weighted. Can we meet? Not at a restaurant, somewhere private. I have so much to explain, and I'd rather do it face to face. Isabel's instinct screamed at her to refuse, to hang up and pretend this conversation had never happened, but her grandmother's letters sat in the box on her bed. and those final lines kept echoing through her mind. Don't let fear keep you from knowing your history. Don't let my silence become your prison. Where? My penthouse, Upper East Side. I'll send a car. What time works for you? The offer felt too fast, too familiar. Isabel thought about her mother's warning, about doors that couldn't be closed, but she also thought about the tremor in Donovan's hands when he'd reached toward her, the tears in his eyes when he'd whispered Maria's name. I can take the subway. Just give me the address. He did, and they agreed on 2 o'clock. When Isabel hung up, her hands were shaking. She made coffee she didn't drink and stared at the wall until it was time to shower and change. She chose jeans and a sweater, nothing fancy, wanting to make clear this wasn't a social call. This was investigation, archaeology, the careful excavation of a past that had been deliberately buried. The building on East 68th Street was the kind of place that had a doorman who opened the entrance before she reached it, and an elevator attendant who pressed the button for the penthouse without asking her floor. The ride up felt endless, her reflection in the polished brass showing a woman who looked younger than 24, uncertain and out of place in a space designed for people who measured wealth in buildings rather than paychecks. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse foyer. Donovan stood waiting, dressed in slacks and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Isabel's entire wardrobe, but his face was what caught her attention. The lines deeper than they'd seemed under restaurant lighting, the shadows beneath his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as she had. Thank you for coming. His voice was softer than it had been on the phone. I know this must be overwhelming. That's an understatement. He led her through the penthouse, past walls hung with art that Isabel recognized from her art history classes at Columbia. A Rothko, a Hockney, pieces worth millions, displayed casually like posters in a college dorm. They reached a sitting room that overlooked Central Park, the trees below stripped bare by November, the park stretching toward the skyline like a green scar through the city's concrete heart. Can I get you anything? Coffee, tea, water? I'm fine. I just want to talk. Donovan settled into an armchair and gestured for Isabel to take the sofa. She sat on the edge, maintaining distance, maintaining the option to leave quickly if needed. You said you and my grandmother were in love, that you left Sicily together. No, not together. That was the problem. His fingers interlaced, then separated, a nervous gesture that seemed at odds with his otherwise controlled demeanor. My family owned land in Corleone, olive groves mostly. We weren't wealthy by American standards, but in the village we had status. Maria's family were fishermen. My father and uncles sat me down and explained very clearly what would happen if I disobeyed. They'd destroy Maria's father's fishing business. They'd make sure her brothers couldn't find work. They'd drive the entire family out of Corleone. And they had the connections to do it. The local officials, the police, everyone owed favors to my family. So you chose money over her. I chose what I thought was protection. They promised if I married the woman they'd selected, a daughter from a wealthy family in Palermo, they'd leave Maria and her family alone. They'd let them live in peace. I believed them. His voice cracked. I was stupid enough to believe them. Isabel studied his face, searching for signs of manipulation, of practiced remorse designed to earn sympathy. But all she saw was genuine anguish, the kind that lived in someone's bones after decades of carrying it. When did you come to America? 3 months after the wedding, my new wife and I were sent to New York to establish a branch of the family business. I hated every moment. The marriage, the pretense, the knowledge that I'd betrayed the only person I'd ever truly loved. And then, 6 months later, I received a letter from Maria. You didn't know she was pregnant. I had no idea. None. She wrote to tell me she'd given birth to a daughter. Our daughter. She wrote to tell me she was leaving Sicily because she couldn't stay, couldn't face the shame and the questions and the pity. She wrote to tell me she never wanted to see me again. Donovan's eyes were wet now, tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. He made no move to wipe them away. I tried to find her. God, I tried. I hired investigators. I sent letters to every Italian community in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. I searched birth records, church registries, immigration documents. But your grandmother was brilliant. She'd changed her name, moved multiple times, covered her tracks completely. After 10 years of searching, I had to accept that she'd succeeded. She'd disappeared, and maybe that was what she wanted. Maybe the kindest thing I could do was respect her choice and leave her in peace. But you kept looking anyway. Not actively, but I never stopped hoping. Every time I saw a woman with dark hair and the right age, every time I heard someone speaking with a Sicilian accent, I'd wonder, is that her? Is that my daughter? Did they survive? Are they happy? The rawness in his voice made Isabel's chest ache. She wanted to stay angry, to maintain the distance that would protect her from getting pulled into whatever complicated emotions swirled through this penthouse. But anger required certainty, and what she felt was confusion, sympathy, and a growing recognition that Donovan wasn't the villain her mother had implied. My mother is 52. You could have found her any time in the last decade if you'd really tried. I didn't know her name. Maria changed it. Changed hers, changed your mother's. Even if I'd stumbled across them on the street, I wouldn't have known. And I thought. His hands clenched into fists. I thought Maria was probably married by then, had built a life. Finding her would only cause pain, dredge up a past she'd worked so hard to escape. Isabel pulled the letter from her bag, the one Maria had written to Rosa. She held it out without speaking. Donovan took it with trembling fingers and read slowly, his lips moving slightly as he parsed his former lover's handwriting. When he finished, he folded the paper carefully and handed it back. She forgave me. After everything, she forgave me. She also died alone. Died without ever seeing you again, without knowing if you'd thought about her even once after she left. I thought about her every single day. Donovan's voice turned fierce, almost angry. Every morning when I woke up next to a woman I didn't love. Every business meeting where I made decisions that made me richer and more miserable. Every holiday, every birthday, every milestone. I thought about Maria and wondered where she was, if she was safe, if she ever thought about me. Don't tell me I didn't care. Caring was all I had left. The apartment's silence pressed in around them. Through the windows, Manhattan sprawled in all its indifferent glory, millions of people living their separate lives, most of them never intersecting, never knowing the pain and joy happening in the apartments above and below and beside them. You have a son. Sterling. Donovan's expression shifted, something complicated passing across his features. Yes, Sterling is 40. He runs the company now, has for the last 5 years. Does he know about my grandmother? No, we're not. Our relationship is difficult, has been for years. I wasn't a good father. Couldn't be when half my heart was still in Sicily, still searching for the woman I'd abandoned. Maybe you should tell him. Maybe he deserves to know he has a half-sister he's never met. I want to, but I wanted to talk to you first, to understand if you even want this connection, this family. You don't owe me anything, Isabel. Neither does your mother. If you want to walk away right now and never speak to me again, I'll understand. The offer hung between them, genuine and terrifying. Isabel could leave, could go back to her life in Jackson Heights, back to job hunting and physical therapy appointments and the comfortable fiction that her family history was simple and contained. But Maria's letter had ended with a command, not a suggestion. Don't let fear keep you from knowing your history. I need time to think, and I need to talk to my mother. She's the one you hurt, really. The one who grew up without a father because you were too scared to fight for the woman you loved. Donovan nodded, accepting the judgment without argument. Take all the time you need. But Isabel, before you go, I want you to have this. He crossed to a desk in the corner and retrieved a small leather box. Inside was a necklace, old and tarnished, the pendant shaped like a wheat stalk. This belonged to my mother. She gave it to me before I married, told me to give it to someone I truly loved. I tried to give it to Maria once, the night before I told her I was leaving Sicily. She refused it, said it would hurt too much to keep. I've carried it with me for 50 years. Why are you giving it to me? Because you're Maria's blood, her legacy, and because I can't carry it anymore. The weight is too much. Isabel closed the box without touching the necklace. I can't accept this. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Then consider it held in trust. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, it's yours. She stood, needing to leave before the emotions swirling through the room pulled her under completely. Donovan walked her to the elevator, his gait slower than it had been when she arrived, like their conversation had aged him another decade. The elevator doors opened, and Isabel stepped inside. As they began to close, Donovan spoke one more time. Your grandmother used to sing. Old songs. Folk songs from the village. Is that how you learned the dialect? From her singing? Isabel felt the memory rise up, sharp and bittersweet. Yes. She'd sing me to sleep when I stayed over. Did you eat lunch? Isabel stared at the message, at the ordinary concern of a mother checking on her daughter, and felt something fracture inside her chest. Rosa had lived 52 years not knowing her father, 52 years carrying the weight of her mother's silence, and for the last 10 years, she'd known he was alive and chosen to maintain that distance. Why? Fear? Anger? Some complicated combination of both? She typed back. Had lunch. See you at 5. We need to talk. The apartment felt different when Isabel returned. The same furniture, the same faded curtains, the same water stain on the ceiling from the upstairs neighbor's leak last year. But now she saw it through the lens of what she'd learned, through the knowledge that her grandmother had built this life from nothing, alone, while the man she'd loved built an empire in the same city, searching for her in all the wrong places. Rosa arrived home at 5:15, carrying 2 pharmacy bags and moving with the careful deliberation of someone managing chronic pain. She set the bags on the counter and immediately turned to fill the kettle, her back to Isabel. You went to see him, didn't you? Not a question, an accusation. Yes. Rosa's shoulders tensed. The kettle trembled in her grip as she set it on the stove. I asked you not to do this. You asked me not to look for answers. But Grandma Maria left a letter. She wanted you to have the choice. The choice to what? To forgive a man who abandoned her? To welcome him into our lives like the last 50 years didn't happen? Isabel pulled out the letter and placed it on the table. Rosa stared at it like it might bite. She forgave him, Mom. Before she died, she forgave him. She said he wasn't a villain, just someone young and scared and trapped. She said you should decide for yourself whether to find him or let it go. But she didn't say to stay angry. She didn't say to punish him forever. Rosa's hands gripped the edge of the counter. You don't understand. You didn't live it. I grew up without a father. I got asked every year at school for Father's Day projects, Christmas programs, parent-teacher conferences. I watched other kids get picked up by their dads while my mother worked double shifts just to keep us fed. I watched her age too fast, die too young, because she carried the weight of surviving alone. And now you know why. Now you know he didn't abandon you on purpose. He didn't know you existed. That doesn't erase the pain. Rosa turned, and her face was wet. It doesn't give me back the childhood I lost, or the father I never had. It doesn't bring my mother back so I can ask her why she never told me the truth. No. But it gives you the chance to have a father now. Isn't that worth something? The kettle began to whistle, a sharp sound that filled the kitchen. Rosa turned off the stove but didn't move to pour the water. She stood frozen, staring at nothing, and Isabel could see the war happening inside her. Anger versus curiosity. Protection versus possibility. What's he like? The question came out barely above a whisper. Sad. Wealthy, obviously. But sad in a way money can't fix. He's carried the guilt for 50 years, Mom. It's eating him alive. Good. Let it. But Rosa's voice lacked conviction. She moved to the table and sat down heavily, her hands shaking from more than Parkinson's. Isabel sat across from her and waited. I always wondered. Rosa's voice was distant now, memory soft. When I was little, I'd make up stories about who my father was. A soldier who died in war, a pilot lost at sea, a scientist on a secret mission. Anything seemed better than the truth, which was that he didn't want us. He did want you. He just didn't know about you. How do I trust that? How do I trust anything he says? Isabel thought about the tears on Donovan's cheeks, the way his voice had broken when he'd read Maria's letter. How do we trust anything? We look at the evidence and make our best guess. Rosa pulled the letter closer and read it again, slowly, her lips moving slightly over the words. When she finished, she folded it with the same care Donovan had shown and pushed it back across the table. I'm not ready to meet him. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. But, her breath hitched. But I won't stop you from seeing him. If you want to know your grandfather, if you want to understand that part of your history, I won't stand in your way. Thank you. Just promise me something. Don't let him buy you. Don't let his money or his guilt or his need for redemption make you think you owe him anything. Family isn't something you inherit. It's something you build. I promise. They sat in the kitchen as the afternoon light faded to evening. Two women bound by blood and silence, and all the complicated truths that lived in the space between them. Outside, Jackson Heights hummed with its usual chaos, car horns and distant music, and the elevated train rumbling past. The world continued, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in fourth-floor walk-ups and Upper East Side penthouses. Isabel's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Sterling Vitale. My father gave me your number. I'd like to meet you if you're willing. Coffee tomorrow? I know this is strange, but I think we should talk before this gets more complicated. She showed the message to Rosa, who read it and let out a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been despair. You have an uncle now. A 40-year-old uncle who runs a real estate empire. This is insane, completely. Should I meet him? Rosa was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and moved to the window, looking out over the street below. When she spoke, Her voice carried a resignation that hurt more than anger would have. Meet him. Learn everything you can. Just remember who you are, where you come from. Remember your grandmother broke her back in factories so I could go to school. Remember I worked 3 jobs so you could go to Columbia. We built this life with our hands. Don't let anyone make you ashamed of that. I could never be ashamed. Good. Because I think you're about to enter a world where people like us are supposed to feel grateful just for being noticed. Isabel texted Sterling back and agreed to meet at a coffee shop in Midtown the following afternoon. Then she made dinner while Rosa took her evening medications, and they ate in front of the television like it was a normal night, like they hadn't just ripped open 50 years of sealed history and exposed all the pain underneath. But when Isabel lay in bed that night, sleep wouldn't come. She thought about Donovan's penthouse and her grandmother's factory jobs. She thought about Sterling's carefully worded text and her mother's warning. She thought about the necklace in the leather box and what it meant to inherit something from a past you never knew existed. Somewhere across the city, in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, Donovan Vitale was probably lying awake too, staring at the ceiling and replaying a conversation from 50 years ago, searching for the moment when everything went wrong, when he could have chosen differently and changed the course of 3 generations. And in another part of Manhattan, Sterling Vitale sat in his own expensive apartment, holding his father's confession like a live grenade, and trying to understand how his entire conception of family had been a carefully constructed lie. The city held them all in its indifferent embrace, millions of stories layering over each other like sediment, like archaeology, like the slow accumulation of time and choice and consequence that turned individuals into history. Isabel finally slept sometime after 3 and dreamed of a village she'd never seen, of hillsides covered in olive trees, of a young woman singing while she worked, her voice carrying across the Mediterranean wind like bells calling people home. The coffee shop Sterling chose was aggressively neutral, a chain place in Midtown where neither of them would have home advantage. Isabel arrived 10 minutes early and ordered black coffee she didn't want, staking out a table near the back where she could watch the door. Sterling walked in at exactly 2 o'clock. He was tall, maybe 6'1", with his father's dark eyes and a controlled bearing that suggested military training or executive coaching. He wore a suit without a tie, the jacket unbuttoned, projecting casual authority. But his face was tight, and when he spotted Isabel, something complicated flickered across his expression before he locked it down behind professional courtesy. He ordered at the counter, then carried his cup to her table and sat without asking permission. Isabel, I appreciate you meeting me on short notice. You said things were getting complicated. How much more complicated can they get? A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Fair point. I suppose finding out you have a secret half-sister does set a high bar for complexity. Is that what I am? Your half-sister? Biologically, yes. My father explained everything last night after you left. How he knew your grandmother in Sicily, how she left without telling him about your mother, how he spent 50 years searching for someone who didn't want to be found. Sterling's fingers drummed once against his cup, then stilled. It's a lot to process. I imagine it is. Finding out your father had a whole other life before you existed. It's more than that. Finding out he had a whole other heart. Everything makes sense now. Why he was always distant, always working, always somewhere else, even when he was standing right in front of me. He wasn't really with us. He was with her. With the woman he left behind. Maria. My grandmother. Yes. Sterling's voice softened slightly. I'm sorry for your loss. From what my father says, she was remarkable. She was. And your mother? Died 12 years ago. Cancer. She and my father had a civil relationship at best. I always wondered why they stayed together, why they didn't just divorce. Now I understand. Guilt is a powerful glue. The bitterness in his tone was carefully controlled, but unmistakable. Isabel sipped her coffee and studied him over the rim of the cup. He looked like someone who'd been good at compartmentalizing his entire life and had just discovered all his carefully separated boxes were actually connected. Why did you want to meet me? Your father could have told you everything. Because there's something he doesn't know yet. Sterling leaned forward, his voice dropping. Someone leaked information about you to the press. It's not public yet, but it will be within 48 hours. Multiple outlets have been calling my office, asking for comment on rumors about Donovan Vitale's secret granddaughter. Isabel's stomach dropped. How? Who even knows? I'm working on finding out. But once this breaks, your life is going to change dramatically. Reporters will show up at your apartment, at your mother's physical therapy appointments, at every place you've ever worked. They'll dig through your history, your finances, your relationships. It will be invasive and exhausting, and you need to be prepared. Can't you stop it? Use lawyers, NDAs, whatever rich people use to bury stories they don't like. Sterling's laugh was sharp. We could try, but that often makes it worse. The harder you fight to keep something quiet, the more people want to know what you're hiding. And honestly, I think my father would rather the truth came out. He's tired of hiding. What about what I want? What my mother wants? That's why I'm here. To give you options. Sterling pulled a folder from the messenger bag beside his chair and slid it across the table. This is a proposed statement we could release preemptively. It tells the story on our terms, acknowledges the connection, but emphasizes everyone's desire for privacy. If you agree, we could send it out this afternoon. Control the narrative before it controls us. Isabel opened the folder and scanned the typed pages. The language was careful, diplomatic, emphasizing the tragic circumstances that separated Donovan from Maria, while carefully avoiding any suggestion of abandonment or scandal. It painted everyone in the best possible light and concluded with a firm request that the family be left to rebuild their relationships in private. And if I don't agree? If I want nothing to do with any of this? Then we say that. We issue a statement that you've asked not to be contacted, that you want to be left alone. It won't stop everyone, but it might slow them down. Isabel closed the folder. 24 hours ago, she'd been a server at the Corleone Room, anonymous and unremarkable. Now she was sitting in a coffee shop with a half-uncle she didn't know, discussing media strategies and public statements like they were topics she had any expertise in. I need to talk to my mother before I decide anything. Of course, Sterling pulled out a business card. Apparently everyone in this family communicated through expensive cardstock, and wrote on the back, "This is my personal cell. Call or text anytime, day or night. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. I know what it's like to have your life disrupted by circumstances you didn't choose." The empathy in his voice sounded genuine, and Isabel felt some of her defensive walls lower slightly. Sterling wasn't the enemy. He was just another person caught in the blast radius of choices made half a century ago. "Can I ask you something? Why are you being so helpful? This can't be easy for you either." Sterling was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee like it held answers. "My father and I haven't been close in years. Decades, really. I've spent most of my adult life trying to understand why he was so emotionally unavailable, why nothing I did was ever quite good enough. Now I know it wasn't about me. It was about a woman he loved and lost, about guilt and regret, and all the ways unresolved pain shapes a person." Sterling looked up, meeting Isabel's eyes directly. "Maybe helping you helps him. And maybe helping him means I finally get to know who my father actually is, underneath all the distance and silence." The honesty caught Isabel off guard. She'd expected coldness, calculation, maybe resentment. Instead, She found a man as confused and hurt as she was, trying to make sense of a story that had rewritten itself overnight. Thank you for the warning, and for the options. I'll talk to my mom and get back to you. Take your time. Well, take what time you can. Sterling grimaced. 48 hours goes fast when reporters are involved. They left the coffee shop together and stood on the midtown sidewalk. Two strangers connected by blood they'd never known flowed between them. Before Sterling could walk away, Isabel spoke again. Do you want to know her? Your half-sister, I mean. My mother. Sterling's composure cracked, just for a second. Emotion flashed across his face before he controlled it. More than anything. I've been an only child my entire life. The idea that I have a sister, that there's family beyond just my father and me. Yes, I want to know her, if she'll let me. She's scared, angry. She spent 52 years not knowing her father existed. This is a lot, I understand, and I'll wait as long as it takes. Family isn't something you rush into. No, it's something you build. Rose's words repeated back like a promise. Sterling nodded once, then hailed a cab and disappeared into Manhattan's endless flow. Isabel walked to the subway and rode back to Jackson Heights, the folder tucked in her bag like evidence of a crime she hadn't committed, but would somehow have to answer for. When she reached the apartment, Rosa was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, reading something on the screen. She looked up when Isabel entered, her expression difficult to read. You're famous, or about to be. Someone posted on Twitter about spotting you leaving a building on East 68th yesterday. The speculation has already started. Isabel moved to look over her mother's shoulder. The tweet had 40,000 likes and counting, complete with a grainy photo that might have been Isabel, or might have been any young woman with dark hair. Spotted outside Donovan Vitale's building today. Word is, he's been meeting with a mysterious young woman. New girlfriend? Secret daughter? Anyone have the tea? Hashtag Vitale Holdings. Hashtag NYC. The responses ranged from curious to cruel. Strangers speculating about her life, her motives, her character. Someone had already found her Instagram and posted screenshots, dissecting her photos for clues about her background, her relationships, her net worth. They're vultures. Rosa's voice was hard. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Sterling warned me. He said we have 48 hours before it breaks wide open. He gave me options for how to handle it. Isabel explained the proposed statement, watching her mother's face for reaction. Rosa listened without interrupting, her lawyer's instinct for processing information kicking in despite the personal stakes. If we issue a statement, we confirm it's true. We give them the story they're already writing in their heads. If we stay silent, they write their own version. At least this way, we control the narrative. Rosa closed the laptop and stood, moving to the window. The afternoon light caught her profile, highlighting the gray in her hair, the lines around her eyes. She looked tired in a way that went deeper than Parkinson's, deeper than age. Your grandmother left me one instruction in her letter. Don't let fear keep me from knowing my history. She wanted me to make the choice freely, without her silence forcing my hand. Rosa turned back to Isabel. I think we issue the statement. We tell the truth, or as much of it as we can stomach. And then we set boundaries. No interviews, no photos, no reality show nonsense. The world gets to know the basic facts, and that's all they get. Are you sure? No. But I'm sure that hiding won't work. Not anymore. So we might as well face it head on. Isabel pulled out Sterling's card and sent a text. We agree to the statement, but we want final approval on the wording, and we want it clear that my mother and I are not looking for money or publicity. Just truth. Sterling's response came within minutes. Understood. I'll have the revised statement ready in 2 hours. You have complete veto power. The statement went out at 6 p.m., timed to hit the evening news cycle. By 7, Isabel's phone was ringing constantly. Unknown numbers that went to voicemail and left messages from reporters requesting interviews, comment, anything. Her Instagram went private, but not before her follower count jumped from 300 to 15,000. Rosa's work colleagues started texting. Friends she hadn't heard from in years called to ask if the rumors were true. The building superintendent knocked on the door to ask if they needed extra security, having spotted a photographer in the lobby. The world had found them, and it wasn't letting go. Isabel stood at the window as the sun set over Jackson Heights, watching the city transform from day to night. Somewhere out there, Donovan was probably fielding his own calls, his own questions. Sterling was likely managing damage control and corporate optics, and reporters were sharpening their stories, searching for angles, looking for the scandal hidden inside the tragedy. But here, in this small apartment that had been built on factory wages and stubbornness and the determination to survive, two women held each other's hands and prepared for the storm they'd never wanted but could no longer avoid. Tomorrow would bring more attention, more questions, more strangers thinking they had a right to this story. But tonight was still theirs. Tonight they could still be just Rosa and Isabel Santoro, mother and daughter, two people trying to make sense of a history that had finally caught up to them. Rosa squeezed Isabel's hand. "We're going to be okay. We've survived worse than reporters and gossip." "Have we? We survived your grandmother dying. We survived my diagnosis. We survived you losing your scholarship and having to leave Columbia. This is just noise." But her voice shook on the last word, and they both knew this was more than noise. This was seismic. The kind of revelation that redrew maps and forced everyone to recalculate their position in the world. Isabel's phone buzzed one more time. A text from Donovan. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For leaving Maria, for the pain it caused, for this invasion of your privacy. You didn't ask for any of this, and you deserve better." She didn't respond, didn't know how to respond, because he was right. She didn't ask for any of this. But she also couldn't deny the pull she felt toward knowing more, understanding more, excavating the full truth of where she came from and who she might become now that all the buried history had been exposed to light. The night deepened outside, and Jackson Heights hummed with its 1,000 small stories, most of them unknown, most of them staying private. But not theirs. Not anymore. Their story was public now, property of anyone with an internet connection and an opinion. And there was no going back to the comfortable anonymity of yesterday, to the safety of not knowing, to the luxury of doors that remained closed. They'd opened them. Now they had to walk through. The statement did its job. Within 48 hours, the initial feeding frenzy peaked and began to subside. Sterling's legal team worked around the clock, sending cease and desist letters to outlets that crossed lines, arranging security for Rosa's medical appointments, orchestrating decoy cars when Isabel and Rosa needed to move through the city without being photographed. By the end of the second week, a celebrity divorce and political scandal pushed the Vitali reunion to page 6, then page 12, then off the news entirely. But the damage was done. Isabel's Instagram had been dissected, her Columbia transcripts leaked and analyzed, her every choice from the past 5 years reframed through the lens of someone chasing wealth and connection. Rosa handled it with surprising grace, her lawyer's instinct for managing crisis kicking in. She ignored the reporters who still occasionally showed up at her physical therapy clinic. She deleted social media apps from her phone. She focused on what she could control: her health, her daughter, the decision about whether to meet the man who'd fathered her 52 years ago. The third week brought unexpected vindication. A reporter from The Times published a long-form piece that actually bothered to interview people who'd known Maria Russo, former co-workers from the garment factories, neighbors from Queens, the priest who'd presided over her funeral. The article painted Maria not as a victim or a gold digger, but as a survivor a woman who'd chosen independence over waiting for rescue. The headline read, "The Woman Who Built a Life, Maria Russo's American Story." Isabel read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Someone had finally seen her grandmother clearly, had honored the strength and sacrifice that had shaped 3 generations. Donovan called that evening. His voice sounded strained. "Did you see the Times piece?" "Yes. I want to do something. To honor her properly. Not just words, but something tangible. Something that would matter to her." "What did you have in mind?" "A scholarship fund. For first-generation immigrant women studying linguistics, education, the fields Maria dreamed about but never got to pursue. I'd seed it with $5 million initially, more if needed. But I want your input. Want to make sure it reflects who she actually was, not some sanitized version I've created in my head." Isabel glanced at Rosa, who was listening from the couch. Her mother's expression was carefully neutral, revealing nothing. "Can we meet to discuss it? All of us? You, Sterling, my mom, and me." Rosa's eyes widened, but she didn't shake her head, didn't refuse. "Your mother wants to meet me?" "She's willing. Finally. But it needs to be private. No restaurants, no public places. Somewhere we won't be photographed or recorded. My penthouse. This Saturday, 2 o'clock. I'll make sure building security keeps everyone out." Saturday arrived cold and bright, December settling over the city with that particular quality of light that made everything sharp-edged and crystalline. Rosa changed outfits 3 times before settling on slacks and a burgundy sweater, her hands shaking as she buttoned it. Isabel had never seen her mother this nervous, not even before her Parkinson's diagnosis. "What if I hate him?" Rosa's voice came out small. "What if I meet him and can't forgive him?" "Then you can't. But at least you'll know. What if I like him? What if he's everything Mom said he was, and I've wasted 52 years being angry at someone who deserved compassion? That's scarier, isn't it? Letting go of the anger." Rosa's laugh was brittle. "Much scarier." Sterling met them in the lobby, his presence apparently enough to make the doorman and security personnel melt away with discretion. He greeted Rosa with careful formality, extending his hand. "Miss Santoro, I'm Sterling. You're—" He paused, the relationship too new and strange to label easily. "It's good to meet you." Rosa shook his hand, studying his face with open curiosity. "You have his eyes, Donovan's, dark and intense, and you have Maria's cheekbones. My father showed me photographs, old ones from Sicily." The elevator ride was silent, tension radiating off Rosa in waves. Isabel stood close enough for their shoulders to touch, offering support without words. Sterling faced the doors, giving them space while remaining present. The penthouse doors opened, and Donovan stood waiting, dressed simply in dark pants and a white shirt. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by anticipation and fear. His eyes went immediately to Rosa and stayed there, drinking in every detail of her face, like a man dying of thirst. Teresa. He used her full name, the one Rosa had abandoned in college for something shorter, more American. "You look so much like her." So much like Maria. Rosa's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Don't compare me to her. I'm my own person." "Of course. I'm sorry. Donovan's voice broke. "I never thought I'd see you. Never thought I'd get this chance." They stood frozen, father and daughter, separated by 10 feet of marble floor and 52 years of absence. Sterling moved to Isabel's side, and they retreated to the far end of the room, giving Rosa and Donovan space while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. Rosa wiped her eyes roughly. "I don't know how to do this. Don't know what to say." "Neither do I. Donovan gestured toward the sitting area. But maybe we could start with sitting down? They settled into chairs, Rosa and Donovan facing each other across a coffee table, Isabel and Sterling on the periphery. The silence stretched painful and long before Rosa finally spoke. Did you love her, my mother? Or was it just some summer romance you left behind when better options appeared? I loved her more than I'd loved anyone before or since. Donovan's answer came immediate and fierce. I was 22 years old and stupid enough to believe I could protect her by obeying my family. They promised they'd leave her alone if I married the woman they'd chosen. They lied. After I left, they spread rumors about Maria, tried to destroy her reputation. By the time I found out, she was already gone. How do I know that's true? How do I know you're not just rewriting history to make yourself look better? You don't. Donovan met her gaze directly. You have every right to doubt me, to hate me, to walk out of here and never speak to me again. I can't prove what was in my heart 50 years ago. I can only tell you what I've carried every day since. The regret, the wondering, the knowledge that I made the wrong choice and destroyed the best thing in my life. Rosa's hands twisted in her lap. She told me you were the love of her life. In the letter she left, she said you were young and trapped, and she forgave you. I don't deserve her forgiveness, or yours. Maybe not. But you're going to get the chance to try anyway, because apparently my daughter is more forgiving than I am. Isabel felt the weight of Rosa's words, the permission embedded in them. Her mother was opening a door she'd kept locked for decades, stepping through despite the fear and anger and all the complicated emotions swirling between them. Sterling cleared his throat softly. If I may, this isn't easy for any of us. I've spent the last month learning my father had a whole life I knew nothing about, that he was emotionally absent because he was living with guilt I couldn't see or understand. His voice softened. But I've also learned family doesn't have to be perfect to be real. It just has to be honest. Rosa looked at Sterling with something like gratitude. You're very diplomatic for someone who just found out his father had a secret past. I've had practice compartmentalizing. Comes with running a corporation. The tension in the room eased fractionally. Donovan seized the moment. I want to show you something, if you're willing. He stood and crossed to a bookshelf, retrieving a leather-bound photo album. He set it on the coffee table and opened it carefully. The photographs were old, black and white or faded color, mounted with corner tabs on thick pages. This is Maria, Sicily, 1972. The woman in the photograph was young and luminous, dark hair falling in waves past her shoulders, eyes bright with intelligence and humor. She stood on a hillside with the sea visible behind her, her hand shading her face from the sun. Isabel had seen pictures of her grandmother, but none from this era, none that showed her so alive and unguarded. Rosa reached out tentatively, then drew her hand back. Can I? Please. Rosa lifted the album and studied each photograph with fierce concentration. Maria laughing. Maria serious. Maria with a group of other young people, all of them dressed in the fashion of the early 70s. And then a photograph of Maria and a young man, their arms around each other, faces close together in a way that suggested intimacy beyond friendship. That's you. Rosa touched the image lightly. You were handsome. I was foolish. Donovan's voice carried decades of self-recrimination. I had everything that mattered, and I threw it away because I was too weak to fight for it. She kept photographs too. Rosa spoke without looking up from the album. Hidden in a box in her closet. I found them after she died. Some of the same ones you have here. I never understood why she'd saved them, why she'd keep pictures of someone who'd hurt her. Now I understand. She kept them because love doesn't stop just because someone leaves. The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. Donovan's face crumpled, and for the first time, Isabel saw him cry openly. Not the controlled tears from their previous meetings, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire frame. Sterling moved instinctively toward his father, then stopped, uncertain if comfort would be welcome. Rosa set the album down and stood. She crossed to Donovan's chair and did something Isabel never expected. She placed her hand on his shoulder. "I'm not ready to call you Dad. Don't know if I ever will be. But I'm willing to try calling you Donovan. I'm willing to learn who you are now, even if I can't forgive who you were then." Donovan covered her hand with his own. "That's more than I deserve. More than I hoped for. Don't make me regret it. I won't. I swear to you, I won't." Sterling caught Isabel's eye and gestured toward the far windows. They moved away from the reunion, giving Rosa and Donovan privacy while remaining in the same room. From this distance, they looked like any father and daughter having a difficult conversation, the decades of separation less visible, less insurmountable. "Your mother is brave." Sterling kept his voice low. "I'm not sure I could be that generous if our positions were reversed. She's terrified, but she's doing it anyway. That's what brave means." "You learned that from her?" "From her and my grandmother. The women in my family, we survive things that should break us. We just keep going. That's not unique to your family. That's just what people do when they don't have the luxury of falling apart." The observation stung because it was true. Isabel thought about all the times she'd wanted to quit Columbia, to give up on linguistics, to stop fighting the academic system that had chewed her up and spit her out. But quitting meant letting her mother down, meant wasting her grandmother's sacrifice, meant admitting the world was right to dismiss her. Sterling continued, his gaze distant. "I've been thinking about Sicily, about going to Corleone, seeing where this all started. My father hasn't been back since he left in 1973. I think he needs to return, to close the circle, make peace with the past." His eyes found hers. "Would you come? You and your mother? Turn this from a solitary pilgrimage into something shared?" The invitation caught Isabel off guard. She'd been so focused on managing the immediate crisis, on getting through each day of media tension and emotional whiplash, that she hadn't thought beyond survival. But Sterling was proposing something bigger, something that acknowledged this wasn't just about damage control or obligation. This was about building something new from the rubble of the past. "I'll ask my mom, but I can't promise. Her health, her work, the expense. The expense isn't a concern. Donovan would cover everything. Private travel, accommodations, whatever you need. He's wanted to do this for years, but couldn't face going alone. What about you? Do you want to see it? The place where your father's heart stayed while he was raising you here?" Sterling's expression turned complicated. "I want to understand him, and I think I need to see it to do that. Need to stand where he stood and try to comprehend what kind of love makes someone carry regret for 50 years. Across the room, Rosa and Donovan had moved to the photographs again, their heads bent together over the album. Rosa pointed to something, and Donovan nodded, speaking too quietly for Isabel to hear. But the body language had shifted from confrontational to curious, from guarded to tentatively open. When they finally regrouped, Rosa's eyes were red, but her posture was stronger. She looked at Isabel with an expression that mingled exhaustion and relief. "Donovan told me about the scholarship fund. For women like Mom, women like us. I think it's a good idea. More than good. It's the right way to honor her. I want your input on the structure, both of you." Donovan looked between Rosa and Isabel. "You knew her in ways I never got to. You understand what would have mattered to her." Sterling mentioned Sicily, a trip to Corleone. Rosa's voice was careful, testing the idea. "To see where this all began. Would you come?" Donovan's hope was so naked it was almost painful to witness. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I think I think Maria would want us to go together to bring her story full circle. Rosa looked at Isabel, a question in her eyes. Isabel nodded slightly, permission and support in the gesture. When? Rosa's answer came slower than Donovan's question, weighted with consideration. After the holidays. January, when the tourists thin out and we can have some privacy. Sterling can handle the arrangements. We'll fly private, stay as long as you need, leave when you're ready. I'll need to clear it with my doctors and my work. Rosa's practical side kicked in, managing logistics to avoid drowning in emotion. Whatever you need, I'll handle the medical clearances, the time off, everything. Donovan's eagerness was tempered with awareness that pushing too hard might shatter this fragile agreement. They talked for another hour, sketching the outlines of the trip, discussing the scholarship fund's mission statement, carefully building bridges across the chasm of lost time. By the time Isabel and Rosa left, the December sky had darkened to full night, Manhattan's lights spreading in all directions like fallen stars. In the elevator, Rosa sagged against the wall. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. You were amazing. I was terrified. Still am. What if we get to Sicily and I realize I can't actually forgive him? What if seeing the place where it all happened makes it worse instead of better? Then we come home. We tried. That's what matters. Rosa's hand found Isabel's and squeezed. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Rosa's doctors approved the trip with detailed instructions about medication schedules and emergency protocols. Donovan arranged for a medical professional to travel with them, someone discreet who could manage Rosa's Parkinson's without making it the focus of every moment. Sterling handled the logistics with military precision. Private jet departure from Teterboro, accommodations in a restored villa outside Corleone, ground transportation, security, everything calibrated to provide privacy and comfort. Isabel used the time to research Sicilian dialect more thoroughly, downloading pronunciation guides and grammar texts, reaching back toward the language her grandmother had tried to pass on. She listened to recordings of elderly speakers from Corleone, their vowels shaped by mountains and sea, their syntax reflecting centuries of isolation from mainland Italy. Each session felt like archaeological excavation, brushing away dirt to reveal fragments of a lost world. Christmas came and went quietly, just Rosa and Isabel in the apartment, maintaining their tradition of Chinese takeout and old movies. But this year felt different, charged with anticipation and anxiety about the journey ahead. On New Year's Eve, Donovan called to confirm the final details. They'd leave January 8th, return January 22nd, 2 weeks to explore the village and surrounding countryside, to walk the paths Maria and Vittorio had walked, to understand the world that had shaped all their lives. The morning of departure, Isabel woke before dawn. She packed and repacked her suitcase 3 times, unable to decide what one brought to meet ghosts. Rosa moved through the apartment with unusual energy, the trip galvanizing something inside her, pushing back against the Parkinson's tremors through sheer determination. The car arrived at 8 to drive them to Teterboro. Sterling sat in the back seat, reviewing something on his tablet, but looked up when they climbed in. Ready? As we'll ever be. Rosa's voice carried false brightness, anxiety bleeding through the edges. My father's already at the airport. He flew in last night from a meeting in Boston. Didn't want to risk any delays. At the private terminal, they bypassed all the usual airport hassles, walking directly from car to plane. The jet was sleek and understated, configured for comfort rather than ostentatious display. Donovan stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking older than Isabel remembered, the weight of this journey visible in his posture. He greeted Rosa with careful formality, a brief hug that she allowed but didn't fully return. Then they were boarding, settling into cream leather seats, accepting drinks from an attendant who then disappeared into the cockpit area. The engines spooled up and they were moving, taxiing, lifting into the gray January sky. Isabel pressed her face to the window, watching New York shrink beneath them. The city where her grandmother had built a life alone. The city where Donovan had built an empire while searching for what he'd lost. The city that held all their separate stories until chance and dialect had finally woven them together. 8 hours later, they landed in Palermo. Another car, another drive, this time through countryside that grew increasingly rural as they left the city behind. The landscape was exactly as the photographs had promised. Hillsides terraced with olive groves, villages clinging to slopes, the Mediterranean glimpsed between peaks in flashes of impossible blue. Corleone announced itself gradually, stone buildings appearing around curves in the road, narrow streets climbing steep inclines. The village had been partially abandoned after earthquakes in the 70s and 80s, but recent restoration efforts had brought some areas back to life. Their villas sat on the outskirts, a renovated farmhouse with thick walls and views across the valley. They settled into rooms, unpacked, regrouped on a terrace as the sun dropped toward the horizon. The air smelled different here, herbs and dust, and something ancient that had no name. Donovan stood at the terrace edge, staring toward the village center with an expression Isabel couldn't parse. "Tomorrow we'll go into town. I want to show you where Maria lived, where we used to meet, if the places still exist." Rosa joined him at the railing. "Did you ever think you'd come back?" "Never. Coming back meant facing what I'd done, admitting I'd thrown away the only thing that mattered. It was easier to stay away, to pretend it was all just a dream that ended badly." "But you kept the photographs, kept her memory alive." "Memory was all I had left." They ate dinner on the terrace, simple food prepared by a local woman Donovan had hired for the duration of their stay. The conversation stayed light, carefully avoiding anything too heavy, everyone exhausted from travel and emotion. By 9 o'clock, Rosa was yawning, her medications making her drowsy. She excused herself, and Sterling followed shortly after, claiming jet lag. Isabel lingered on the terrace with Donovan, neither quite ready to face their separate rooms and whatever dreams awaited there. The night was surprisingly cold, stars sharp overhead in the absence of city light. "Thank you for coming." Donovan spoke without looking at her. "I know this isn't easy for you or your mother, but it means everything to me." She needed to see it, to understand where she comes from. "And you? What do you need?" Isabel considered the question, surprised by its directness. "To know if language can really carry memory across generations. If the dialect my grandmother taught me is enough to connect me to this place, these people." Language is always enough. It's how we mark ourselves, how we claim belonging. You speak Maria's Sicilian, you carry her voice forward. That's not nothing. But I don't know if I belong here, if I belong anywhere really. Not in academia after what happened at Columbia. Not in restaurants serving people who don't see me. Not in this world of private jets and penthouses. Belonging isn't about location. It's about knowing your own story well enough that you can stand anywhere and say, "This is who I am. This is where I come from." And that's enough. The words settled into Isabel's chest, finding purchase there. She thought about her grandmother crossing the ocean alone, pregnant and terrified, building a life in a language not her own. She thought about Rosa working 3 jobs to send her daughter to college. She thought about herself, starting over after Columbia, refusing to let one man's plagiarism define her entire future. You're right. Belonging is something you build, not something you inherit. Exactly. Though inheriting a few things doesn't hurt. Donovan's attempt at humor fell flat, and he grimaced. "Sorry, bad joke." "It's okay. I know you're trying." They sat in comfortable silence while the temperature dropped and the stars wheeled overhead. Finally, Isabel stood. "I should sleep. Tomorrow's going to be intense." "It is. But we'll face it together. That's the difference between then and now. Then I was alone, making choices in isolation. Now we're family, and family faces things together. Isabel paused in the doorway. Are we? Family, I mean? We're becoming it. That's close enough for now. Morning arrived bright and cold, the valley below wreathed in mist that burned off as the sun climbed. They ate breakfast together, then piled into the car for the short drive into Corleone's center. The village was quiet, most shops still closed, elderly residents moving slowly through narrow streets. Donovan directed the driver to a small piazza where a church anchored the space, its facade weathered but intact. This is where Maria's family lived. That building there. He pointed to a 3-story structure with peeling yellow paint and shuttered windows. Her father kept his fishing equipment on the ground floor. They lived above. It's so small. Rosa's observation wasn't critical, just factual. Most families in the village lived like this. The wealthy, like mine, had villas on the hillsides. The workers lived here, close together, supporting each other through hard times. They walked through the piazza, Donovan narrating memories with increasing confidence. The cafe where he'd first spoken to Maria, the fountain where they'd agreed to meet in secret. The path leading out of town toward the olive groves where they'd stolen hours together, hidden from disapproving eyes. An elderly woman emerged from one of the buildings, moving with a cane, her face a map of years lived. She stopped when she saw Donovan, her eyes narrowing, recognition dawning slowly. Vittorio? Vittorio Vitale? Donovan froze, then moved toward her. Si, Signora Greco. You remember me. Ricordo tutto. I remember everything. The woman switched to dialect, her words shaped by the same patterns Isabel had learned. You left. You broke Maria's heart. We all thought you were dead until we heard you'd gone to America. I made terrible mistakes. I came back to try to make peace with them. Signora Greco looked past Donovan to Rosa and Isabel. Chi sono? Who are they? Maria's daughter. And her granddaughter. The old woman's expression transformed, shock giving way to something softer. Maria had a daughter? We suspected, but she left before anyone could confirm it. She came to America? Yes. Built a life there. Died 10 years ago. Signora Greco crossed herself. She was a good girl. Deserved better than what this village gave her. Her gaze fixed on Rosa. You have her face. Her strength, too, I imagine. I hope so. Rosa managed the response in Italian, her accent American but comprehensible. Come. Signora Greco gestured toward her building. I have things that belonged to her family. Photos, letters. After they died, I kept them, thinking maybe someday someone would want them. They followed her into a dim apartment that smelled of coffee and old fabric. She retrieved a cardboard box from a closet and set it on the table. Inside were treasures, photographs of young Maria with her parents and siblings, a prayer book with Maria's name inscribed, letters written in careful script. Rosa's hands trembled as she lifted each item, seeing her mother as a girl, a teenager, a young woman before pregnancy and immigration had reshaped her life. Isabel stood behind her mother, looking over her shoulder, and felt the past become tangible, immediate, impossible to dismiss as distant history. Signora Greco watched them with knowing eyes. Your mother loved you very much. She told me once, before she left, that she was going to give her child a better life than Corleone could offer. She kept that promise. She did. Rosa's voice broke. She gave me everything. Then you have nothing to forgive her for, and nothing to regret. The wisdom in the old woman's words struck like a bell. Rosa wiped her eyes and carefully returned the items to the box. Can I keep these? Take them back to America? They're yours. Your history. Take them and remember that Maria was loved here, even if circumstances drove her away. They thanked Signora Greco and returned to the street, the box tucked under Sterling's arm. Donovan was pale, shaken by the encounter. She blamed me. Signora Greco. She didn't say it directly, but it was in her voice. I broke Maria's heart. You did, but you also gave her a daughter, and that daughter gave her a granddaughter. Pain and joy aren't separate. They're woven together. Rosa touched his arm briefly. Show me where you used to meet. The olive groves. They drove out of town, following a dirt road that climbed into the hills. The olive trees were ancient, their trunks gnarled and twisted, branches stark against the January sky. Donovan led them to a specific grove where the trees formed a natural cathedral, their canopy filtering light into patterns of shadow and gold. Here. This is where we'd come. Where we'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. Where I promised her I'd find a way for us to be together. And then you didn't. Rosa's statement held no accusation now, just acknowledgement. And then I didn't. Because I was young and scared, and I believed lies about duty being more important than love. Sterling had wandered away, giving them privacy, but now he called out. There's something carved here, on this tree. They moved to where he stood. Cut into the olive's bark, weathered but still visible, were initials inside a heart. V plus M, 1972. You did this? Isabel touched the carving lightly. The last time we met here, before I told her I was leaving for Palermo to marry someone else. I wanted there to be proof we'd existed, that what we felt was real. It survived. Your mark on this place. The tree grew around it but kept it visible. Some things are too deep to erase. That's what I've learned. You can't run from love. You can't pretend it didn't happen. It marks you permanently, changes you in ways that last forever. Rosa stood very still, staring at the carving. Then she pulled out her phone and took a photograph. When she was done, she looked at Donovan directly. I forgive you. Not because what you did was right. Not because 50 years of my mother's loneliness can be erased. But because holding on to anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you. And because my mother forgave you first, and I trust her judgment. Donovan's knees buckled. Sterling caught him, supporting his father's weight as emotions he'd suppressed for decades finally broke free. Rosa moved closer, and this time when she embraced him, there was no hesitation, no reservation. Just a daughter holding her father while he wept for all the lost years, all the choices that couldn't be unmade, all the love that had survived despite everything. Isabel stepped back, giving them space, and found Sterling beside her. They watched father and daughter together, two people who'd learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing to move forward without the weight of the past crushing every step. Your father was right. Isabel kept her voice low. Family faces things together. That's what makes it real. It's what we should have been doing all along. But better late than never. They stayed in Sicily for 12 more days, exploring the village and surrounding countryside, meeting distant relatives who still lived in the region, gathering stories and photographs and pieces of a history that had almost been lost. Rosa grew stronger each day, her Parkinson's tremors seeming to lessen as if the act of forgiveness had lifted a physical burden as well as an emotional one. On their final morning, they visited the village cemetery where Maria's parents were buried. Donovan placed flowers on their graves and spoke in dialect, asking forgiveness from people who couldn't answer, but whose judgment he still feared. Rosa stood beside him, and when he finished, she added her own words, thanking them for raising a daughter strong enough to survive anything, brave enough to cross an ocean alone, wise enough to forgive the man who'd hurt her. The flight home felt different from the journey out. Where they'd traveled as strangers pretending to be family, they returned as family, learning to be honest with each other. Rosa dozed against the window, exhausted but peaceful. Sterling worked on his laptop, but looked up frequently to check on his father. And Donovan sat quiet and still, his gaze distant, processing 2 weeks of emotional archaeology. Isabel pulled out her notebook and began to write, capturing observations about the dialect variations she'd heard, the grammatical structures that differed from standard Italian, the ways language preserved culture even as villages emptied and traditions faded. This could be her dissertation if she ever returned to academia, or it could simply be a record for herself, proof that she'd completed the journey her grandmother had started, that she'd carried Maria's voice back to the place it was born. When they landed at Teterboro, Isabel expected relief, the comfort of familiar ground. Instead, she felt suspended between worlds, not fully American, but not Sicilian either. Something in between, something hybrid and strange and entirely her own. They separated at the terminal, Rosa and Isabel in one car heading to Jackson Heights, Sterling and Donovan in another toward Manhattan. But before they parted, Donovan pulled Rosa into a long embrace. "Thank you for giving me the chance to know you, for forgiving me when I didn't deserve it." "You're welcome. But understand something. I forgave you for my sake, not yours. I needed to let it go so I could move forward." "I understand, and I'll take whatever form of relationship you're willing to give me." Rosa pulled back, studying his face. "I think I'm willing to give you a real one. If you're patient. If you understand it won't happen overnight. I've waited 52 years. I can wait as long as you need." In the car heading home, Rosa was quiet, staring out the window at the city sliding past. Finally, she spoke without turning her head. "I have a father. After all these years, I have a father. It feels impossible, but it's real. You felt it in Sicily. The connection, the history, the way it all fits together. I did. And now I have to figure out what to do with it. How to be someone's daughter when I've spent my whole life being my own person. You don't stop being yourself. You just add another layer, another story." "When did you get so philosophical?" "Sicily. Something about standing in the place where it all began, it changes your perspective." They reached the apartment as dusk settled over Jackson Heights. The building looked exactly as they'd left it, but Isabel saw it differently now. Not as a limitation or a compromise, but as another point in the constellation of places that had shaped her family. Corleone, Queens. This fourth-floor walk-up where she'd grown up surrounded by love and sacrifice and the determination to survive. Inside, the apartment held its familiar smells. Old coffee, Rosa's lavender hand cream, the faint mustiness of pre-war buildings. Isabel saw it differently now, not as limitation, but as foundation, the place where her grandmother's journey had taken root, where Rosa had built a life with her hands, where she'd learned that survival was its own form of grace. Mail had piled beneath the door slot. Rosa sorted through it while Isabel made tea, both moving slowly, jet-lagged and emotionally spent. A thick envelope caught Rosa's attention. Columbia University letterhead. Office of Academic Affairs. "Open it." Isabel almost refused. Whatever institutional bureaucracy it contained could wait. But her mother's expression stopped her. She slit the envelope and scanned the letter once, then again. Reinstatement. Full restoration of academic standing. Professor Blackwood found responsible for plagiarism and falsification. Scholarship funding restored. The words should have felt like vindication. Instead, they felt distant, belonging to a version of herself she'd outgrown. She'd built different strengths through serving tables and navigating family revelations, and carrying her grandmother's dialect home. But maybe she didn't have to choose. Maybe she could be both, survivor and scholar, server and researcher, someone who understood that dignity wasn't something institutions granted, but something you claimed for yourself. Rosa read over her shoulder, tears streaming. Your grandmother didn't cross an ocean so you could play it safe. She was right. Maria had risked everything for possibility. Rosa had worked herself to exhaustion for opportunity. And Isabel owed it to them both to take what had been returned and build something that mattered. I'll call them Monday. That night, Isabel fell asleep thinking about Sicily, about olive groves and dialect and carved initials that time couldn't erase, about love that survived separation and language that carried memory across generations until someone finally understood. Some things are too deep to erase. Donovan had been right, and she'd found them, recognized them, brought them home. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.